are tuning into Teaching Trailblazers with Chris from Education to the Core. In this episode, we will be chatting with Beth Baker about SEL and PBIS. Beth is an author, consultant, and an educator. She is an expert and a guru about social emotional learning and positive behavior interventions and supports. If this is your first time hearing about Education to the Core, you landed in the right spot. At ETTC, we want to make sure you not only have the best resources created by master teachers, but we want to be there every step of the way, guiding you in your classrooms. So you can not only be there for your students, but you could have a better work-life balance. Make sure to subscribe to the ETTC YouTube channel, like this video, and visit educationtothecore.com for tons of teaching tips, resources, and freebies, which are updated daily. Below this video, you will find the links that all of ETTC has to offer, as well as any links we may be discussing during this vlog. Enjoy, and remember, your journey starts here. Hello, Teacher Trailblazers. This is Chris from Education to the Core, and I am so excited to be sitting down with Beth Baker. She is an educator, a behavioral coach, a consultant, an author. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Beth, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited for having you to sit down and having this opportunity to talk with you.
Well, thanks for inviting me to talk about my favorite things, PBIS, social emotional behavior stuff. I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, thank you. Obviously, I just went a very, very snapshot of your CV and a little resume there. But we would love to just learn a little bit more about you, of like how you came into education and, you know, why some of like SEL, social emotional learning, and PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports, are kind of like your favorite things. Like, how did you fall into that category?
I have been in the field of education for more than 25 years now, and I started out in special education, working with kids who have emotional behavior disorders. And I remember it was early in my teaching career, maybe 3 years in, and this student called me a very colorful name, and as procedure, he should be suspended for calling me that. So I was marching him down to the principal's office, and the school psychologist intercepted me and said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Oh, this student just called me this name, so now he's going to be suspended." And she said, "What do you hope is accomplished from that suspension?" And I said, "Well, I hope that he will never call me that name again." And she said, "He's been suspended for that 8 million times already. Do you really think this one time is going to be the thing that'll, flip the switch in his head and he'll say, 'Oh, I shouldn't call her that'?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what other alternatives I have. I mean, what else do? We suspend for, behaviors, disruptive behaviors." And she said, "You need to teach him what it is you want him to do. We all get mad, but we don't all call people names. And so you need to teach him to take that anger, to be okay with that anger. But you need to teach him what to do with it, to be calm from that anger, to find solutions to that anger." And it was like this light bulb moment to me, because nobody had ever told me that before, and I was just fresh out of college, and I was young and idealistic, and I had all these great ideas, but I had really no ideas. I didn't know anything about social skills. I didn't know anything about social emotional learning, which at that time was still really, really new. And so that was my light bulb moment to try to find something else to do besides suspending kids, that we need to keep them in school because that's where they learn, that's where they can practice. And so that was started my journey into looking for alternatives to suspending kids for behaviors.
That's really fascinating. And I think it's really going to lead up into some really interesting conversations coming up that I think we're going to tie a lot into like those first early years and how important it is to kind of take a step back of, really looking at the behavior and like, why the student is doing it versus just that initial reaction.
Right. Yes.
You also, I believe the last couple of years you've been teaching abroad. Is that correct as well? Like kind of.
Yes. Yeah, I wanted to do something different and kind of get a new perspective on teaching, and I was kind of burning out, and I had a really great opportunity to go to Venezuela. So I went down there for a couple of years and soaked up the sun, did some nice traveling, and then again, because I'm so interested in social emotional learning, thinking about what are social emotional what are the things that are important in Venezuela that are not important to us, or how do they see things differently? How do I look at behavior differently? Do they consider behaviors the same way I do? And so it was a really interesting, great way to be immersed in a different culture and a different way of thinking, and um, knowing that I bring with me my upbringing, central Minnesota, white Catholic upbringing, doesn't always translate to other areas and areas of the world. So I really loved it. And then I went to China, and then because of the pandemic, um, had to shift my career because I got locked out of China, and had to part ways with the school I was at, but really enjoyed the time that I was able to spend in China. Again, looking at behaviors very differently, and shifting my mindset from what I think is a behavior and how I think we should be reacting to being culturally appropriate and dealing with kids, in an equitable way. Again, remembering my own background, and not every person in the world needs to be, you know, has my same sense of um, behavior and reactions and actions. And
I think that's,
so,
yeah, I
yeah.
think that's really, really interesting that you kind of bring up this idea of like equity and how
Hmm.
important it is to kind of always be including that.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so not only just like your community, but again, like new teachers coming into the area, or if you
Hmm.
are lucky enough and you transfer to another location, it's always like, okay, you have
Hmm.
your own core values that, you are so believe in. But again,
Right.
it's understanding the community where you're at,
Right.
building those relationships and
Hmm.
understanding those students of, this is kind of acceptable, even though where you came from, it might not
Right.
be, but
Right.
here we
Right.
are.
I remember in Venezuela, I was doing a certain lesson from the second step curriculum. And it was this girl had lost her bracelet, and she accused this other girl of finding her bracelet and taking it, and she wanted it back. And so they were arguing about this bracelet. And so I stopped it and I said, okay, what would you do? And this one boy said, I would go to her mom and say, did you buy that for her birthday? And I said, really? You'd go to her mom and you would ask her mom? And he said, yeah, I would. And then the teacher chimed up and said, yes, that's what they do, because that's how they do things in Venezuela. Kids can go up to parents, and it's more of a community. It takes a village to raise a child. And that's, all the moms are all the moms, and that was just surprised me, because going up and actually talking to the other parent as a kid I would never think to do that, but having to shift my perspective from that's not a great idea to, oh, that's how you would do it. Okay, well, that actually is a great idea, because you would solve the problem of whose bracelet this is. You know, but it totally shifted my whole lesson and the words I was going to say and what I was going to present, because it was my values, my upbringing, my culture that I was trying to put on these kids in Venezuela. So it was a learning lesson for me. Mhm.
Now, I would love to kind of just hear a little bit more about some of the SEL like activities that you were doing there, and then also kind of maybe give an idea of what SEL in the classroom might look like for teachers in the United States, of what
Mhm.
they could do that would classify as an SEL type of discussion or
Mhm.
activity.
Well, social emotional learning is so important, and I've heard some teachers say, I can't do social emotional learning because I can't put another thing on my plate. And we say social emotional learning is the plate on which everything else is added. Because if we don't teach kids and help kids learn how to identify their feelings and then know what to do with those feelings, you know, then they can't read, they can't spend time focused on reading or on their math or whatever if their thoughts are about something that happened at home or something on the playground or what's for lunch or they didn't have lunch or all of those things that cause all of our emotions that affect everything we do throughout the day. We need to know how to manage those. As adults, we need to learn how to manage those, but we also need to teach kids how to manage those to be more successful in school. So we have to spend time, and it can't just come from the counselor or the social worker. When I was in China, I was the counselor. So I was going into classrooms doing a social emotional lesson, and I loved it. But what was really important and what really made the lesson even more valuable is when the teacher would co teach with me, or at the very least would, spread it throughout the day. Like, remember what Miss Beth taught us about, being angry and taking calming breaths. And maybe now is a good time to take some calming breaths so that it's not just coming from me, but that it's something that we all do all around the school, all day long. It makes it more real, it makes it more authentic, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the plate that you speak of, it's so important too, because that foundational skills of SEL,
Hmm.
and it's true,
Yes.
it leads to academic success. It leads
Hmm.
to fewer behavioral problems and graduation rates, and
Yeah.
the list goes on
Yes.
of all
Yes.
the pros of having
Hmm.
SEL activities in your classroom. And I think you kind of hit it right there of spreading it out throughout the day. And I like to tell teachers too, it's very easily um, kind of just cross curricular of you can put a little SEL into everything you do, whether
Hmm.
it be math, reading,
Yes.
language arts, social studies,
Hmm.
science. I mean, anything.
Hmm.
And please correct
Yes.
me if I'm wrong, but I mean, it would be amazing if you could, here's 10 minutes of every day to sit down and focus purely on
Yes.
that,
Yes.
but it's not a deal breaker.
Hmm.
I think as long as you're doing a little bit of something, it's
Yes.
better than,
Hmm.
oh, well, I don't have time for a 20-minute SEL
Right.
lesson today.
Right.
Oh, well, I guess I'll push that off till tomorrow.
And I would say we can't afford not to take that 20 minutes. That there's so much research. If you go to castle.org website, they have all the great gold standard research on why we need to do social emotional learning and how it really pays off in the long run. Like you were saying, graduation rates go up, test scores go up, everything goes up if we are willing to take that 20 minutes of time invested in building community, social emotional learning. Um, I just think it's more valuable that if you don't take that 20 minutes, you're going to take 20 minutes throughout your day trying to calm the kids down, getting kids back on task, getting them in line, whatever. And so I think everybody needs to find 20 minutes school wide and just spend some time on social emotional learning in all grade levels. In pre-K, when I was in China, we were doing pre-K up through grade 12. Everybody can do social emotional learning. I knew a woman who was a math teacher who was doing some work in graduate school around math anxiety. And so she was implementing calming breaths, like before math quizzes or math tests, or I think she just even started just doing it more often, teaching kids some calming strategies before a big test, and seeing that test scores were actually starting to go up because kids, the anxiety was going down. She was teaching them how to take that anxiety down, so their scores were going up. So we can't afford not to take 20 minutes to do social emotional learning. That's what I think.
It's a good thought. I'm right there with you.
Thank you.
And I think, and it's so refreshing. It's one of those, I mean, I told you this before. I mean, both of our like work and our own personal beliefs are really linked up a lot. And we have a lot of the same values and the kind of the same outlook on SEL and behavior in particular. So, so you kind of said you were naming a couple there. There's so many like smaller umbrellas underneath this big umbrella of SEL, like, social, like, self-awareness, self-management, leadership skills, identifying emotions. I mean, the list goes on. Do you feel one serves as more of a foundational skill to the others by chance, personally or professionally?
I think that first is the self-awareness. That's where I always like to start with kids, is what is their self-awareness? Because if they can't identify their emotions or their feelings, then getting to the other 4 foundational skills could be more difficult. But I also did a survey once with adults, and it was amazing to me how stuck they were in their own self-awareness, being able to identify their own feelings, their own, also it's identifying feelings, but also what are you good at? What are you not so good at? What are your goals? And adults have a hard time with that. And so kids have a hard time with that. And I think that's a really great place to start, is that self-awareness. And you could do the other areas as well, but you need to make sure that kids can identify their feelings, understand their feelings, and then know what to do with those feelings in an appropriate way.
Yeah, I mean, feelings are just, it's so abstract, and it could be really challenging
Yes.
to, have and help those students have that understanding. And kind of like you said, even we as adults still struggle. So it's really taking that step back, understanding and how to appropriately cope with that, and good skills to build off of those.
Yes. Yeah. It's a great place to start. And teaching kids also that there are no bad feelings. There are no bad feelings. They're all just feelings. And the important thing is what we do with those feelings, how we react to those feelings. That when we get upset, like when the boy called me a name, he was upset, but he wasn't upset at me, because what I found, because that school psychologist pulled me aside, he was not suspended. I didn't even finish the story. He wasn't suspended. He went to the behavior room instead, came back to my classroom 10 minutes later or something, apologized for calling me that name. But then we also found out that his dad was going to be in some trouble, and the boy was really worried about that situation. And it wasn't even about me. It was the anxiety and the fear about what was going to happen to his dad. And so then we brought in the social worker, who was able to call dad and got some things in place so the family would be okay, so the boy would be okay. And when this all was revealed to him, he just kind of melted in a way, and just, we built up trust, we built up community. And if he would have been suspended, he would have gone home for a day or two, and we would have never learned that there's all this other stuff underneath, because we didn't take the time to listen to him. And it really helped build, I think, our relationship, where he could be more honest with me, and I just think he did so much better at school because we listened to him and we helped him solve some problems, some really big adult-sized problems. He was in 7th grade and he doesn't, he didn't know what to do if his dad was going to be gone. It was just him and his dad. Their neighborhood wasn't so great. Who was going to take care of him? Who was going to buy groceries? So, we managed to get all of that figured out, and it was such a much better happy ending than what it could have been. So
it's really just, like you said, kind of thinking about, their environment, where they're coming from. And like you said, we don't know what they are coming into school with. It's the setting events and antecedents that, happen way before the behavior ever occurs, that it's just still lingering and thinking about it. And it's all these outside stressors that, have such an effect of, did they eat the night before? Did they eat the morning of? I mean, hunger is a big thing. And let alone, just safety concerns that need to be met prior to picking up any pencil and thinking about math.
Right. And so the other thing that for me is really new in this work is the trauma-informed practices. So we're looking at what is the trauma that these kids are bringing to the school and how can we help with some of that. And I was fortunate enough years ago to work with the best social worker ever, who is really good at contacting parents and finding them the resources they needed from our community to help with some of the discomfort that they were having in the home, to help our kids do better in school. She worked tirelessly, endlessly, helping families to find those resources so their kids could do better in school. But when kids don't have that support, then that's when, the disruptions happen, the name calling happens. We all have tons of stories about kids like that. And so we as adults need to do better. We owe it to the kids, we owe it to our school communities to take the time, to take the 20 minutes to do social emotional learning, to give kids the tools that they need to manage their day better. And also, adults are learning, the teachers are learning better strategies for dealing with anxiety, frustration, sadness, because they're teaching it. Hopefully they're also doing it, so maybe they're learning some new skills too. So
absolutely. And I love that you kind of brought up this idea of trauma-informed practices, because again, it is such a, it's a hot topic right now, but it's nothing new.
Right.
And it was funny, just last school year, I was lucky enough to lead a professional development on trauma-informed practices. And while I was doing it, it was so, I guess, kind of disheartening in a way that so many teachers either during the PD or came up to me afterwards and was like, I am not a social worker. I am not a counselor. That is not my field. And I'm like, it's not, you're not sitting down and having a consultation, one-on-one therapy session here. It's taking those foundational skills, like you were just saying, of building relationships, having this understanding, and it's teaching and looking at things through a trauma-informed lens of, it's not asking you to sit down and, tell me about this, or, how are you feeling type of that way. It's just understanding that this student is coming from a different place.
Right. But I have also heard that anybody in education, all teachers are in a way mental health practitioners, because we all care about kids' mental health, and we're all fighting to get more social workers, more counselors, more time in our school day to help manage these situations. And so in a sense, we're all mental health practitioners, to varying degrees. I don't want to say we're therapists. I'm not a therapist and I'm not licensed to do therapy, but I have had kids come to me with some pretty big problems that I've had to learn how to talk through those problems and come up with solutions, help the kids find solutions to that. So in a sense, we are all mental health practitioners and we need to take it seriously and build up our own toolbox of strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just knowing who to go to. And it's like that team approach of, okay,
Yes.
well, I don't know this, but here's my resources. I'm going to link you to this person in the community.
Yes.
We're going to solve this together. And it's kind of just building that team. Student.
Yes. I also was very fortunate to have a paraprofessional in my classroom. And here's a shout out to the paras who work very hard supporting all of our students and don't get the recognition they deserve. But she was really great at presenting herself like a mom figure in the classroom, and kids would tell her anything. She could get them to, they could yell at me because I was a teacher and I was the one who wanted them to sit down and do their reading. And then she could pull them aside and get to the underlying stressor. And we also have to really acknowledge that maybe I'm not going to be that kid's person. Maybe my pair is going to be that kid's person. Maybe the custodian is going to be that kid's person. It doesn't matter as long as every kid has a person in that school, and then, like you said, we work on a team approach. But it can't be that it has to just be me or it has to just be the social worker. We all need to be invested in helping kids figure that stuff out. And finding the person. Every kid needs to find a person.
Yes. And I would love to just take this chance to echo exactly what you said about the paras and the recognition. And I personally also want to thank every single para out there. I mean, I started
are awesome.
as a para many, many years back during my undergrad. I was a para during the day and took night classes for my special ed elementary. And it's true. And I've worked with some amazing paras over the years. So
yes,
to hear that and echo those sentiments. So thank you.
Yes.
This perfectly leads up to not really a terrible turn of the road, but I think a pathway very parallel to SEL and what we've been discussing of kind of this teamwork approach and finding your person. And that's kind of through this lens of PBIS and positive behavioral supports.
Yes.
And you actually co-authored a book titled the PBIS Team Handbook. And
there it is.
I think I have this planned. I have my copy right here.
How nice.
What was your purpose of creating this text? And kind of what was it designed for?
I was going to grad school and wanting to do something with school-wide behavior. And so in my research, trying to figure out what my project was going to be, I kept running into PBIS. And I thought, this would be really great. And I kept bringing it to my principal. We should do this. And he's like, well, I don't know what it is. I don't know. And I couldn't really explain what it was. And then all of a sudden, maybe a year later, the district decided, oh, we're going to do PBIS and we're going to make Beth the coach because she keeps talking about it. I'm like, oh, okay. I'd love to do it. And so we went to a training. Our Department of Education in Minnesota provides training to cohorts, to districts that want to implement PBIS. And I was taking notes and they gave us this great notebook and I'm taking more notes, and we go back to school. We had a great team together. We had administrative support, and it just felt like there were 8 million things we were supposed to be implementing, and all at the same time. And I couldn't figure out, it just was overwhelming to me. So I I love books. And so I started looking at books, and all the books were very uh, academic and research, and you had to read through all the footnotes of who did all the research. It's like, no, just tell me what to do.
Theory
And
based, I'm sure, like it's, yes.
yeah, I mean, that's very important stuff. But when I'm in the thick of it, I just needed somebody to tell me what to do. So it was one of those situations of, I can't find the book that I want, so I'm going to write the book that I want. And my co-author, Shar Ryan, was our state trainer. So she really had the expertise of what PBIS is and how to implement it. And I wanted a book that just explained kind of step by step how to get a good tier 1 foundation, because if you don't have the good tier 1 foundation, you're not going to get tiers 2 and 3 together. And in my first year, we were trying to do everything. Like, my social worker is like, oh, I'll do tiers 2 and 3. Well, okay, do
Great.
that. I'm not quite sure how that's going to look, but trying to do way too much. And so the Shar got us to kind of sit back for a second and told us when to do which surveys and how to really look at the data and what the data should be telling us. And um, so that's why I wrote the book. And it's used around the world from teams trying to just quietly, simply implement PBIS in their schools, because there are a lot of moving parts to it. And even though I went through the training with our state, it just still seemed very overwhelming to me. But once you get the idea behind the systems and the practices, it's great. PBIS is a great framework for any school. It's just a way to organize your school, a way to set up your school. And I think every school should be doing PBIS, because it's just a way to organize your school and how you want to look at behavior, how you want to look at discipline, how you want to build community. What are your expectations going to be school-wide, so that everybody's on the same page, and it just makes things so much easier.
And I have to say, as a PBIS coach myself, and also a Swiss facilitator, this book is so teacher friendly, and it really goes through step by step of, even if you have a tier 1 system in place, it still has so many good things of, oh, I'd never thought of it that way. And oh yeah, that's definitely something to build fidelity and try to think of it to make it a stronger foundation, so you can go to those advanced tiers.
Yeah, because you can't do 2 and 3 unless you've got a good solid tier 1 foundation. And that can take 2 or 3 years to get that going. You're trying to change a lot of mindsets from teachers, from students, from parents and community. There's a lot of thought that you need to do, a lot of prep work you need to do. I mean, the first part of the book is just laying the foundation. It's not even doing PBIS. It's just, how do you know your staff is ready? How do you know you need it? What questions are you asking? Let's look at your data. Does your data even show that you need it? So you really need to spend a year just looking at, do we even need PBIS, and why do we need PBIS, before you even start really implementing it. So, but what we were trying to do that first year, yeah, let's do it all. We're going to implement everything. And it was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah. Well, I have actually a little insert from, I would love to kind of pick your brain about I have found a nice little chunk. But before I do that, I kind of just maybe a little teaser of possibly looking at a tier 2 version of this text upcoming, like advanced tiers. Are you guys thinking about a book about how advanced?
Possibly. We have both kind of moved on to other things right now. But there definitely should be tier 2, tier 3. But I'm always happy to talk about it if anybody ever, has questions about it or, but maybe.
It's interesting, just a little sneak peek maybe.
Sure.
I think when most people hear kind of PBIS and just behavior in general, I feel most mindsets kind of automatically go to those high priority, aggressive behaviors like the calling out students, the
Mhm.
extremely disruptive. And you kind of make a great point in your book that I kind of want to like pull out to address a little bit.
Mhm.
You're discussing in your book here about, there are numerous behaviors that constitute minor or major infractions, as defined by schools and districts, as you said. I love this part though. You said we also encourage, and this is a direct quote if anybody wants to get the book. We also encourage staff to be mindful of students who may not exhibit disruptive behaviors, but rather exhibit depressive or quiet and inward behaviors that prevent them from engaging in class and with their classmates and teachers. These students may need additional support as well.
Mhm.
Can you just a little bit further with this of kind of what you meant by it and why it's such an important yet overlooked
Mhm.
kind of task?
Yeah, I remember writing that part and wanting to really make a case for those kids who are quiet and in the background and don't get the attention they need because other kids are being loud or teachers have to do this or, there's so many to-do lists. And we forget about the kids who are quiet in the back. And those kids who are quiet in the back could be hurting the most, So so we need to somebody explained it to me like this, that we spend a lot of time on disruptive behaviors, but teachers spend a lot of time with interruptive behaviors as well. And interruptive behaviors are those kids who are sitting in the back and interrupting the teaching. um, but we also need to make sure that those quiet kids who are withdrawn into themselves, there could be a lot going on there as well. And it's so easy to forget those kids because we think they're in the back, they're not bugging me, I can get through my lesson, they've turned in their math, it wasn't so great, they could have done better, but they're doing something. But we need to really make sure that they're included in what we're looking at for possibly, traumatic um, events in their life that are causing them to withdraw or be quiet. Some kids are just naturally shy, and that's okay too. But, we need to make sure that every kid, like I said earlier, every kid has a person. And even those kids who are quiet and withdrawn need to have a person. And so we can't forget about those kids either. I had a student who, I mentioned the custodians earlier. I had a student whose person was the custodian. And if he was not in a good place and just needed to take a break, I would call the custodian, who, bless his heart, would say, "Yeah, we'll go sweep that hallway." Didn't really need to be swept, but you know what? He recognized that he was this kid's person, and he was willing to be that person and find things to occupy the boy while they talked about whatever the boy needed to talk about. And so, and that's one of the great things about PBIS is it's truly is a school-wide framework where you include the office people, the people in the lunchroom, the custodians, the bus drivers, everybody is invested in this village of your community, of your school community. And so, finding that person for the quiet kids, they may not like the loud, noisy, fun teacher, but they might like the more reserved teacher who doesn't tell jokes, whatever. It's finding that person, that every kid needs that person.
That I feel lately, every conversation I ever always have, it always goes back to building positive rapport and
Mhm.
appropriate relationships.
Right.
It's truly at the heart of
Yes.
what we do as
Yes.
educators. It's,
Yes.
connecting and building relationships to build that trust.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And trust is so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And to not forget those kids who are quiet in the back, you know, make sure that they're okay too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, we talked a little bit about like PBIS and how we both obviously feel PBIS should be in every school.
Yes.
And it's such a great, and I think the focus is a framework, and
Mm-hmm.
it's PBIS is a framework. It's not, the program. It's not the school. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a framework of how everything and what you do on a daily basis is designed and kind of follows, and everyone's on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say if, maybe districts are not implementing PBIS, or maybe they're in their early stages? What are some of those main concepts that teachers can still do in their classrooms and implement that it's like the same, like those
Mm-hmm.
foundational skills of PBIS? What could they still
Yeah.
do if they don't have a program?
Before my school decided to implement PBIS, I was a setting 3 EBD teacher, kids with emotional behavior disorders. So we were in the classroom. Sometimes kids would go out to the mainstream, but we were kind of our little school within a school. And so what I did was I did expectations, or I did a behavior matrix. Like, how are we going to go to the cafeteria? How are we going to go to gym class? How are we going to turn in our work? How are we going to, all the things that you need to do throughout the day. And I did looks like, sounds like, feels like charts for how's it going to look like, sound like, feel like when we go to the cafeteria. And I'd make a chart and I'd hang it on a wall, and I'd have the kids write these with me. So it was we were all doing this work together. It wasn't me telling them what they were going to do, but it was us coming up with our own criteria for everything. I must have had, I don't know, 50 of those things hanging in the classroom. But then I would always remind kids, okay, we're going to the cafeteria. Let's look at our looks like, sounds like, feels like chart. What are we going to do? How are we going to walk? What is it going to sound like? And we would review those constantly. So doing those little steps is sort of starting to slip into PBIS, because you're doing those expectations, and we're doing practices with the kids. Kids knew exactly what the expectations were. And then because we were sort of a school within a school, if kids did mess up something, I was able to take the kid aside and let's talk about it and let's try it again. And, maybe that way you tried it wasn't so great, but maybe we could try it a different way, and let's do some problem solving around that. Let's retry it again. Let's redo it again. And so I think we were reducing a lot of suspensions because we were really working on learning new skills and practicing those skills till they became second nature.
Mhm. And model, model, model. Oh
Mhm.
my goodness, I cannot stress that enough. I feel
Yes,
it's also such an important.
I remember one day when the kids were it was just they were middle school. So we were middle school kids, and they were just constantly like picking on each other all day long, like just nothing huge, nothing major, but it was just like, stop it, quit looking at me. That kid called me a name. It's like, and finally it was towards the end of the day, and I just lost it and yelled at the class, you guys need to stop. I can't stand it anymore. And the kids were like, oh my gosh, Miss Baker's finally lost it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go put myself in timeout, and I'm going to fill out a processing sheet because I just completely overreacted. And then we're going to talk about it. So I put myself in the timeout, Carol, filled out a processing sheet, what I did, what I wanted to have happen, what I should have done. And then I came back to the class and we circled up, and I read my processing sheet to the kids. And they were like, so quiet. And then they started apologizing to me. for these little behaviors. And then they started apologizing to each other. And it was the most amazing thing. You can't plan for that stuff to happen. You can't write a lesson plan around that. It just organically, naturally happened. And it was an amazing thing to see, you know, role modeling. I get upset, I get mad, but this is what I do when I get mad. I'm not going to call you names. I'm not going to swear. I'm not going to cuss. I'm not going to throw anything. This is how I'm going to handle my anger and my frustration.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, at the time I was completely mortified how I reacted. Just, you know, my voice level was just way louder than it should have been. But I think it was a great teachable moment. And I think I modeled to the kids what to do when you get upset, because adults get upset too. I'm not going to lie. You know, adults get upset. We all get upset.
And I think it's kind of, as we kind of come to the end of our conversation, like kind of pulling like SEL and like PBIS together in exactly like that scenario you were just talking about of identifying your own behaviors and kind of like why we do that. And I would love to kind of hear like your input of why should educators really take this like functional approach to
Mhm.
kind of behavior and kind of like coping skills, like, you know, how important is function?
Yeah, function is huge. And I think that even before I knew about PBIS, it was always, you know, trying to figure out the function. And I go back to that boy who gave me the first lesson, my first lesson in PBIS. You know, his behavior wasn't at all about me, but it was about all this stuff that was happening in his life outside of school and not knowing what to do with that. And so always trying to figure out what is the function, what is the need that they're trying to meet. um, I remember, I don't know how many kids I've had over the years who've been diagnosed with ADHD. And then I say to my parent, that's not ADHD, it's anxiety. It's never ADHD, it's anxiety masquerading as ADHD. There are a lot of um, uh, things that look the same between ADHD and anxiety, but you can't treat them the same. And it's going back to that trauma informed practice of what is the function, what is the cause? Is there something that we can do to help the family or help with resources? Giving the kids coping tools, coping strategies, um, because a lot of time it's not us, and we want to think it's us, or we want to think it's about school. But you know, kids these days, with everything that's going on right now in the world, there's a lot going on, and we have to always think about what is the function of the behavior. The kid called me a name, but it wasn't about the kid calling me a name. It was about, what does he need? What is the need that he's not, the need that he has that he doesn't know what to do with? The need that has no, mm, I'm sorry, I just lost my thought.
No, that's fine. I think that if you don't mind, like I'll pop into a little bit of
Yes,
you're saying like finding the need of it, but kind of just finding the need of how to deal with it in a more appropriate way.
yes, 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 yes,
Um,
yes,
I think
yes.
that's the key of, you know, as you said, you know, of how important it is to look at the function of why the behavior
Hmm.
is occurring.
Hmm.
But again, it's kind of taking that output that they're displaying, but doing it in a more appropriate manner.
Yes. Hmm.
And I feel you kind of bring up an excellent point too of now more than ever, I feel of how important it is to look at trauma informed lens
Hmm.
and building those relationships,
Hmm.
especially
Hmm.
in our current situations and
Hmm.
possibly in the future as well. And it's always been important, but I feel now more than ever, it's
Hmm.
really taking
Hmm.
hindsight to
Right,
education and
right. And equity as well. You know, equity is something that I think that we thought we were doing, but there's always room for more improvement in that area. And in our PBIS teams, making sure that our teams are reflective of who our students are and who our student body and who our community is. So that, again, it's not just white people, making all the rules, that we're including everybody in our community. How do we want our school to be? How do we want our school to function, so that we're meeting everybody's needs, so that everybody feels like they are invested in our school and are there to, be honored and to learn.
Absolutely. It's really looking at everybody, the student just as a whole, and everything that they come with, and making sure that it's the best experience that they could possibly have, and look at their strengths and build on that. So
yeah.
absolutely.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Beth, for this amazing conversation. I adored it, and I know our listeners are going to love it and get a lot out of it too as well. How could possibly, if listeners are really interested about your book or reaching you a little bit further, like what's kind of the avenues of best to do that, and where can they find your book? And
the book is available on Amazon.
okay.
The PBIS Team Handbook, you can find it on Amazon, or our publisher is Free Spirit Publishing in Minneapolis. I can be reached on Twitter at PBIS_Beth on Twitter. And I also have a Facebook group called the PBIS Coach that I encourage anyone who's interested in PBIS to join our Facebook group. We have lively conversations about social emotional learning and what is PBIS and how can we implement it. So yeah, please, if there are any questions, I always love to talk about PBIS and social emotional learning. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I will definitely include the Amazon link for your book.
Okay.
Our vlog and below too as well. And I do have to say, I am also a very active member and participant in the PBIS Coach on Facebook. And if you're interested in joining that, it's really, really, like Beth said, it's a great conversation, but it's also safe conversation where you don't feel that, you're going to be attacked, or if you have your own kind of interpretation of things, or you want to share, your own personal beliefs on something. It's a good conversation back and forth of kind of very well in this safe, professional way. So I appreciate that as always.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, thank you again so much. And of course, I mean, I could go on hours and hours talking with you, Beth, but we would love to have you back again to kind of continue this conversation and to keep on going as time allows. And if you're willing and able, we would love to have
I would love it. Yes, I'd be happy to be back. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot. Thank you so much for inviting me. That was really, really touched and honored that you would think of me. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you again.
Thank you, Teaching Trailblazers of Education to the Core, for joining Beth Baker and me, Chris, for SEL and PBIS. Your journey starts here. Make sure to like and share this video, as well as subscribe to this YouTube channel. We will be meeting with more teachers across all disciplines for support, strategies, and engaging activities that you can implement in your own classrooms. We would also love to hear from you in the comments down below. This channel and Education to the Core is all about helping you grow in your profession and to build this community together. Remember, be kind and be strong. I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.